like this when I see so many certifications. I think certifications are good because it gives you a fundamental place to start from, to say that I understand this. The leaders aren't interested in process, but what they want to do is they really want to hire someone to come in and change the organization. The purpose of the estimation, you see. So it's about going back to why. Why are we estimating? Because I know there's a big following out there for no estimation that I tend to use is this thing called the affinity method of story estimating. So rather than sitting there, if I were that scrum master coming into the organization and I was told ahead of time that, look, actually, we're going to get you into this team that's not delivering, they're not providing value, there's all this and the other.
Okay, Mark, before getting on to the actual session, can we know more about yourself, like what you do, like what is your basic background about Agile, and regarding your Amazon book also, can you just give a little overview?
Sure. So a little bit about me, very briefly. I could talk lots about me, but let's not bore your listeners too much. I started my career something like about 32 years ago as a systems analyst programmer, working a lot for the subcontracted to the Ministry of Defence. Now, I can't really tell you what I used to work on because I'd have to kill you otherwise. So, but let's just say there were very complicated programs in jet engines or jet fighters that you see flying around the skies today. So, yeah, so that was a long time ago, and really at that time in my career, Agile wasn't used very much. But about 20 years ago, I started doing something called XP with a couple of colleagues when we were working at another agency for the Ministry of Defence. And we started doing pair programming, and that sort of introduced us to Agile and the ways in which Agile can work. But of course, fast forward then, some years later, I started becoming a project manager because if I'm honest, I really wasn't good as a developer. So I became a project manager, which is what most project managers do, isn't it?
Yeah.
They become, anyway, I'm taking the mickey out of project managers out there now. There we go. I really appreciated and liked working in the Agile way. And I suspect what a lot of people didn't recognize at the time, that there were very few options. And this was back in the early 2000s, about 2003, when I started working for the Inland Revenue. We had few options for using Agile. The option that we used at that time was something called RUP. And I know some people these days think Agile, don't think so. But, it was as Agile as it was back in those days. But that's before I discovered DSDM. Dynamic Systems Development Methodology, which you may or may not have heard of. So wide background in Agile process and whatever, but after a while I got bored. I really found that I was more interested in people and psychology and how teams work, and felt that Agile had a lot to offer from a people perspective. So what I did then for some years was go around and bug anybody who had listened long enough and tell them, look, it's not about process and it's not about frameworks. It's really about people. It's about culture. And it's about getting those things right rather than which is the right process. Because, I've discovered that it doesn't matter what process you use. It really is more important about getting the people behind the process, helping them to understand how to utilize it more effectively. So, does that give you enough of an overview of me? Because again, like I said, I could go on talking for ages. Depends on what you'd want to know.
Yeah. So I have a lot of questions to you, Mark. Before getting onto it, I just had a quick overview on your book, because yesterday when we discussed, it's leaders, it's how you start, it's not how you finish. Can you briefly, you also meant that it is actually meant for senior leaders in the organization. Can you give a little overview, what you are coming, because I saw a set of 5-step approach also, starting from first day, and the last transformation it is for months. So can you give a bit of overview, how it helps the organization, or also how it helps the senior leaders in the organization?
Yeah, sure. So as I was saying, culture was something I got more involved with from about 2003 onwards, as I started looking at how organizations work more effectively. And the ultimate answer to any question really is leadership is something that needs to be really factored in when you're looking at something like a transformation. Now, I do make the emphasis around transformation because the number of organizations that I've come across who claim to be able to transform other organizations are not very good at transforming at all. They're really good at doing what I refer to in the book as the transactional aspects of a transformation. Things like looking at the process, looking at the systems and all these sorts of things, which are useful. Don't get me wrong; they are useful in themselves, but they aren't where the game is won or lost. These are under the transformational elements. The things like the culture, the people, leadership, management. How those things are applied becomes way more important than those transactional things that I talked about earlier. So what I set out to do in the book was to help leaders to understand, look, it really is about how you start a transformation. Because I mentioned DSDM earlier, and DSDM is one of the most powerful frameworks out there, I feel, for helping organizations in their quest for agile, because it really truly is a framework by the definition, because you can insert something like Scrum into DSDM and it works quite nicely. A colleague of mine, Andrew Craddock, has been doing that for years. And one of the things about DSDM is they have this small little aspect at the start of the process, which is called pre-project. Now, if you go and look in the manual for DSDM, they give you 1 or 2 lines on what you should do in pre-project. But that really is a very high level sort of idea about what you should do before you start a project. Now, it becomes even more interesting before you start a transformation, which is more than a project. It's a program, it's a portfolio sometimes of different things that are all interacting with each other. And yet what tends to happen is people fall into doing a transformation very, very quickly. They think they know what it is. Because what they tend to do is they tend to get in some of the large consultancies, who I won't name because I don't want to give them any advertising. But these consultancies are invited into the organization, charge huge sums of money to the organization to give them something which is a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. Yeah, go do some training, teach people how to do Scrum, teach them how to do DevOps, ... And it's almost like a pro-rote thing. And again, these are all the transactional elements of a transformation, not the transformational ones. So by looking at those, then you don't really get a transformation. So what you do is you need to take some steps back before you come up with a plan, an idea of how you're going to transform something. Because I can tell you from every organization I've been in, every transformation is different. It really is. I mean, there's nuances and things that you need to take into account. So hence, you've got a bunch of questions for me later, and I can guarantee you that the answer to all of those questions will always start with the expression, it depends. So you can ask me a question, but I'll come back with, well, it depends really, because the context changes in so many different ways. And what the consultant has to do when they go into an organization, and I refer to the consultant in my book as what I call a trusted agile advisor, one person who comes in and works at the senior level of the organization to help those senior level leaders get their heads around what we mean and what we don't mean by agile. Because I can promise you the one thing I hear time and time again, I don't know about you, sir, but the one thing I hear time and time again is leaders want agile to make their organization more efficient. It just makes me want to jump off a roof or scream or something. It's just like, look, doing agile is not going to make you efficient. And if it did, you ought to be really seriously worried, if it makes you efficient, because efficiency means you think you're going to do the same things over and over and over again. And if this pandemic that we're going through right now has taught us anything, we ought to start being able to flex what we do and how we do it. So therefore, there's no one answer to anything. So this pre-transformation model that I share is this idea that you get the leaders at the very first day, start to think about, what do you mean by agile? What is not agile? What's the values of the organization? Why do you think you need Agile? What's the most important things it's going to give you? Think about the benefits of it rather than talking about the features. You know, it's going to give you self-organizing teams. Again, I've had people tell me that, you know, that the benefits of Agile are self-organizing teams. No, that's a feature of Agile. It's not a benefit. You know, it's what does Agile give you? Anyway, I feel I'm rambling now, and you've got me on a very lovely topic for me, which is my book, of course. So, and thank you. It's yeah, because for me, I think this is a message that leaders need to get. The transformation has to start with them, because if it doesn't, there is no transformation. You end up with what I call a pseudo transformation. It's the appearance of change when there's actually no change at all, because as soon as these leaders leave, the organization will fall back into the way it was, and you know, things, you know, motor on. And it's great for the consultancies. They can come in and do the transformation again, but where's the transformation if you keep on dependent on consultants?
Yeah. So I mean, let me put the question in this way, Mark. Like, because any organization, you know, like at the end, they need a good revenue. I mean, they are bringing this agile or any aspects in order to bring a good margin in their execution, basically. Like, can I put it in this way? Like, can I ask you, like, can you give a simple, because I know like you have given a lot of information, like how the leaders should react, but how your book will help in a way, like it impacts. I mean, take one example, take any case study, like how your book is going to help that organization will get have a benefit if they follow your pseudonyms, or else if they follow your book, or else is there only learning is there in your book, like how it is going to help like seniors basically, and how it will impact the organization basically?
Yeah, sure. So look, one of the key things that I hear so often, especially when consultants come into the organization, I'll always be told that we have a set budget, and that means that we need to be able to focus and target, you know, our resources on something that's very huge and beneficial. Yeah. Now, I say huge because this is what tends to happen with transformations. They become very big very quickly, and that becomes a problem. So I believe it's a fair thing to say to people, look, actually, before you start any transformation, which for a lot of these large organizations is going to cost them tens of millions of pounds, I promise you, because in the places where I've gone and submitted proposals, because what they want is a traditional transformation, then we're talking about training the whole organization, upskilling them, landing capability, and all these sorts of good things. That's absolutely fine if that's the place where you want to go. But what if it isn't? What if your idea of the agile organization is to deliver value quickly? Then there might be easier and better ways to do that might come out of 2 or 3 conversations with me going around speaking to the people. So by the time we got through the 5 steps, we would have maybe co-designed a creative solution to help the organization to transform into what it needs to be, rather than the one-size-fits-all, the 2-year plan where the consultancies will guarantee to change you, and there really is no change at the end of it. Because as McKinsey, which sort of makes me rather interesting, McKinsey will tell you that 77% of agile transformations fail. So the big benefit of the book is, look, what if your transformation was one of the ones that succeeded? And how about you mitigate that risk of making sure that you get it to be a success? Well, answering just some of the questions in the first step of the book would really help you. Getting someone to come in then and do some sort of assessment around how agile is the organization right now, because very often the organizations can be agile in different pockets. So in which case you might already have a bit of a, how to say, some place to reflect on, so that you can actually look at and say, well, look, here they're doing agile better than maybe these people are. So if we can start to learn some of the lessons from these people, we can start to roll out transformation far easier across the whole organization. That in itself would end up saving the organization millions, you know, in spent fees to consultants, because ultimately they need one consultant that helps the leadership team to come and help the leaders to change. once the leaders are changed and they're getting their ideas about agility, they'll begin to be able to see, hear, feel, smell even what is agile, what isn't. Because quite often the big issue is and it's a big elephant in the room that many consultants can't talk about. So hence I don't blame all consultants, because when they're brought into organizations, they can't talk about the elephant in the room, which is the leader or the manager who's brought them in isn't actually agile themselves. So in the book, I give 5 mistakes as to what takes the Agile Transformations off the road in the early days. And one of those mistakes is the mindset of the managers and the leaders and the consultants who come in to help them, because they are way less agile than they need to be in order to drop an agile capability and an agile way of working and an agile way of being in the organization. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. And again,
Yeah.
because I'm again coming to your book, like, so when you wrote this book, you know, like, for example, I'm going to read this book completely, or else any leaders are going to read this book. I mean, how you have constructed this book, by what was there in your mind, and how, like, how this book has been constructed actually, like.
Yeah. Okay. So look, it's a very good question, because what's actually happened is that book that you would have in your hands is the 3rd iteration of the book, because I started off, you know, and if I'm honest, you know, the first iteration of the book was really about these big myths of agile and how people think it's one thing, it's not another. But that just led me to what I consider to be the first mistake, you know, which then ended up in the book as mistake number 1, which is people don't really understand what agile is because they've not had informed dialogue around agile. Now, what do I mean by informed dialogue? Well, informed means having a chat to people who've done this, who've got the t-shirt and have been around this for some time. And you know, as you can see, I've got lots of grey hair here, you know, unlike your good self, who doesn't seem to have any grey hair, but there we go. So, and the idea here is that, you know, experience can actually help people. So if I've been around this and done this with many, many organizations, even organizations such as Rolls-Royce, you know, I mean, you wouldn't maybe classify them as being agile, because a lot of people would think, oh, well, making jet engines, you'd want to be doing that waterfall, wouldn't you? Well, maybe not, because it depends on the form of agility you want to be using. So what really helped me to write that book was using all my experience in the different organizations to understand, firstly, well, look, what are the 5 things we're trying to solve here? What are the top 5 mistakes? And then rather than just be someone who complains about the problems, because we have, I mean, in my terminology, I would say any idiot can find a problem. Because the problems are easy to find. You only have to open your eyes and your ears and you'll see them. They're there in front of you. But what about the solutions? And again, coming up with a solution that I felt had to be agile in nature. But yet, as you look at it, you might think, well, these 5 steps, they look rather waterfall, don't they? But actually, because these are done in a 90-day period, in a very confined period, sort of to coincide with a sort of a time frame. I know that in DSDM, we look at about 6 weeks for a foundation phase maximum. What I'm sort of looking at is, well, look, use 12 weeks, because quite often you don't have the access to the leaders as often as you want, plus the right sort of people to have in the room, because to get the transformation off to the right start, you need to have the right people in the room. And you certainly don't want to be creating the roadmap and then handing it out to your project managers, and then they go around the organization beating the people over the head with it. That's not going to work, because the one thing I've recognized and noticed, I don't know about you, sir, but for me, people don't like being changed. You know, I always hear people say they don't like change. Okay, so there's some cognitive biases for sure that tell us that people, you know, aren't really liking change. But me, I love change. You see, I love newness. I love working with new stuff. So it's not true to say I don't like change. But what I hate and what I despise, you know, is people trying to change me. And again, this that helps. And if we look at the co-diagnosis phase, the step 4 of the model, extremely important. Because one thing I've recognized coaching leaders from the CEO down in organizations is leaders don't like to be told sometimes what their problems are, because they keep hearing it from their people all the time. But it's like there's a game leaders play quite often, which is la, 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 la. We don't want to hear or see what's going on in the organization, because yeah, that's just the same old. But what we do is if we get an expensive consultant in, with a nice suit on, nice shoes, and wears a nice cologne, that sort of thing, then we can listen to him far more easily than we can listen to our own people. So part of the work to do is to get the people in the room with the leaders and get them working together collaboratively. Because what do we know about Agile? It works better when people collaborate. We want to remove the silos. So all of the steps are purposely designed with an Agile way of working. And quite often how I describe this is, look, you want to make your Agile transformation Agile. Because if you don't, then that's mistake number 4. You start running what are called Agile Transformations. It's this abomination between waterfall and Agile, which doesn't work, because ultimately organizations will become waterfall in the end rather than the Agile ones, because waterfall will win, because leaders in a lot of these large organizations have become used to and programmed, if you like, to have command and control and to have predict and control and these sorts of ways of working. It's in their genetics, it's in their DNA, and quite often they're not wanting to change this. So in which case, the book is really an offering, to leaders to say to them, look, do it different. If you do it different, you'll spot different results. But I warn you, you'll just end up with being one of the 77%, a meaningful statistic that will not really help or support your organization. So in which case, if you do want to make this a success, you really do want to start different, hence the title of the book. So
yeah. So like, again, I know like you put your full experience on this book basically, but again, I just want to understand, like, right, in the current market, there are different processes they are following in terms of Agile. Like, so did you follow anything specifically in your book, or else is it your full experience has been put on that book? Like, I know it's all base the same, but have you followed any specific prototypes, or also have you followed any specific aspects?
Okay, so look, of course, I always work in a very Scrum stroke lean type of way. I mean, you can see my board behind me, which is already set up. So I like to think I practice what I preach. So from a basis of helping me maintain motivation and that sort of thing, then those sorts of things I tend to find work quite well. I used DSDM as a sort of the large backdrop, because again, that's largely where my experience comes from. Now, I'll be honest with you here, and I apologize to anyone who might listen to this and might misinterpret, what I'm saying here. But being a fan of DSDM, I helped write the 2014 edition, and I provided in later editions the 9 principles, along with a few other collaborators in DSDM, the 9 principles of Agile leadership. So hence I've got a bit of an affiliation towards that. So even though I've signed that manifesto that's out there about agnostic Agile, I have to own my biases. My biases say that, look, I think DSDM is really good. However, there are other things that work for other organizations. And I'll mention one other, which is SAFE. Now, SAFE, I get a bit, this twitch comes because I trained for the SPC, the consultant certificate, and my employer at the time wanted to put me through it because they'd already committed wholesale to doing SAFE in the organization. Now, when I went on the course and I was trained, by the people who, they're great guys. Unfortunately, what they were doing is they were training me for an exam. And that exam was, of course, the gospel according to Dean Leffingwell. Now, again, I don't want to be insulting to people, but what's tended to happen here now is there tends to be these factions within Agile, starting what we call Agile wars. And it all gets a bit silly, because as I say, this is all transactional. This is not really where the game is won. But yet when I'm studying the SPC, they've got a section, on leadership. Yay. And it's a whole section, a whole 5 pages on leadership. And who of course gets top billing in there? John Cotter. Now, I've nothing against Mr. Cotter. I think he's really good, and his thinking has evolved somewhat down through the years, which is good to see. but it's not where the game is won or lost. And hence, we tend to look at things in a very traditional fashion. And unfortunately, fortunately, you can put it like this. Fortunately, SAFE really panders to those people in organizations who don't want to make very much change, but want to make it look like they're changing. So hence you get the structures and everything else. And you're probably familiar with SAFE, yes?
Yeah.
And you see all the hierarchies and stuff. And you might look at that and you think, how in the name of God is any of that considered to be agile? But don't worry about it, Mark. You can take out some of these layers. Okay, great. But when I look at this at first, I don't get inspired by it. But people who do get inspired by it is people who want command and control, and people who want to take on board just specific ways of doing things. And again, it tends to hurt the organization unless they really are at that phase of agile, because I tend to talk about agility as a continuum. That at one end of a spectrum, you've got sort of waterfall and very command and control ways of working. And at the other end, you'll have a very anti-fragile and way of working that's really more beneficial for those entrepreneurial, smaller type, more agile, resilient type organizations. And somewhere in between will be the organizations that you and I are going to work for. So the idea is always to push them up to the next level of agility that's most comfortable for them. And I think that's the key all around. So I don't know if I've diverted off your question somewhat there, but to me, what particular methods? Well, there was no real method, but what I wanted to do was to provide that pre-transformation, which I think applies to all methods. You really need to think about, first off, sit down with the leaders and really understand what it is we want to get from this. Why are we doing this? Before we go spending tens of millions, because the first rule in SAFE is if you don't need to scale, don't. But yet the second thing they're telling you is go and train the whole organization in SAFE. Who does that benefit? I don't think it benefits the organization. I think it benefits the consultants and the trainers who actually go in and say this is what we need to do. Whereas I'm a much more of an advocate around piloting and doing small experiments in the organization. And because each part of the organization, as I said earlier, tends to be different. So in which case we can now tailor the transformation for each part of the organization, rather than thinking that we have to do the one size fits all, go and disrupt the whole organization and watch it all fall down around your ears. Because just the story to finish that story about when I was asked to go do my SPC, I left that organization after 4 months because the consultants in there were so adamant that this was the way to do it. I gave a letter to HR and my boss and my boss's boss to say, here's 15 reasons why this is all going to fail. And as you brought me in here to be your transformation coach, I'm not going to be able to change any of this. And here's 15 reasons why. So there we go. Thank you. Goodbye. And I walked out. And it really was on the principle of it, because it was really, I won't swear on your video here, but we have an expression here in the UK that just said it all for me. And I find out 6 months later that the whole SAFE thing had been cancelled, and now SAFE isn't allowed to be mentioned in that organisation. And it's a very big organisation that you'll know about if I told you their name. So there we go. Okay. Enough about SAFE.
Yeah. So when you wrote this book, I'm sure you would have seen a big gap in the market, right? Because my questions will be again and again pointing towards your book. Like, did you see any gaps which you're trying to fill out of this book? I mean, what is the major? I suppose
I did.
Yeah.
I suppose I did, but if I can be entirely honest, Buchan, I wrote a book that people don't want to read, because who is the book aimed at? It's aimed at leaders. And I can promise you that in my early days of marketing the book, I gave the book away for free to many people. And Amazon's got this great little thing that you can do to give the book away, and then notice when people have accepted it. You can't know when they're reading it, of course, but a large majority of people that I gave the book to, leaders in organizations, they're not interested because they think, oh, this is another process. because ultimately leaders aren't interested in process. But what they want to do is they really want to hire someone to come in and change the organization. And my lesson is that, look, it's the leader's job to change the organization, not the consultants, because the consultant will have to leave at some point. And if they haven't changed the organization by the time they leave, then you're going to be in trouble. But quite often what happens is there's a bit of a revolving door that leaders tend to walk through. You know, it's like, in comes one leader, they don't like this way of doing things, they want to do it this way. Some leaders have heard of Agile, and they think, you know, they think of Jim Jones and drinking Kool-Aid, that this is some sort of cult, you know, that, but yet there's a lot of good stuff, in the Agile ways of doing things. So the gap in the market for me was get the leaders trained, get them to start doing Agile. So hence a lot of my interventions that I talk about, the Agile Leadership 101, the Leadership Boot Camp. These are the things that aren't really done. And usually the reasons I'm given for it is that we don't have time. Because I mean, you try and get some time with the CEO or even the CIO and sit down with them for half an hour to even talk about it. Oh, yeah, well, great. Yeah, so you get fobbed off very quickly. It's just like, these are busy people. I understand that, and I have every sympathy for them. But you see, what they don't understand is unless you get behind this transformation, it's not going to transform anything. The only thing it's going to transform is the consultancies, who are going to take big amounts of money. In which case, this is why I'm so anti that, because I know you shouldn't really be anti anything. You should be pro something. So if I'm pro anything, I'm pro transformation. I'm pro leaders and getting leaders to change the culture themselves. And that's the big gap in the market, because from where I'm sitting, and from the people I work with in the organization at team level, they become somewhat dismayed. Because the one thing I get asked more than anything when I go and train people at the team level is that, has the leader seen this? Have the leaders attended this course? And if I'm honest, I have to say, well, no, they haven't. Or no, they haven't seen it. Or what do the leaders think of this? Oh, they think it's great. Yeah, but you go do it. Don't ask the leaders to do it. And that really is disillusioning. So it's quite sad, really. So hence this is why I somewhat make the funny comment of no one reads the book. Well, yeah, the people are reading the book, and that's really, really good. But I think what's very useful about the book is if for people who are agile coaches or scrum masters or project managers, for them to read the book and understand, look, for it to be really successful, the leaders need to change. However, there's a bunch of things you can do in that book that will still apply to you. There's no harm in you doing co-diagnosis. There's no harm in doing co-creation and co-design. These are all really, really good things that you can be doing before you start the transformation. And just because the CEO isn't sponsoring it, like I suggest, or the chief culture change officer, as I suggest, then there's still a lot of stuff that you can do for yourself. And I think, if people can get their heads around that, then that's a useful thing for them to do.
Okay. And before I get on to my questions, this is my last question on your book, basically. Like, okay. I'm sure like you would have got some feedback from your own peers, right? Like, did you get any feedback, or else from any other community also where you would have circulated? So what is the feedback you have got, or else what is the success they have achieved by reading your book?
Well, I mean, I've been actually quite touched by a lot of the feedback I've had from people in my community, because they recognize, just like I have done, that it's about leaders changing. The big issue is that many people don't call it out, because as I said earlier, this is the elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about. Because why would you? If you're a consultancy going into an organization and the first thing you're going to tell the leaders is you need to change, they don't want to hear that. So I think people are very praiseworthy of the book, and I've got some lovely commentary on Amazon from people, and many people who say, yeah, look, the advice is actually spot on. The problem is getting people to take that advice. And again, this is the thing that's out of our hands, you see, because I promise you, I'm probably one of the world's best coaches as far as I'm concerned. I know it might sound like I've got a big head, but the thing is, I can't change anybody. That's not my job. It's not my job to change anybody. People change themselves, you see. And no matter how good the book is, no matter how good the messenger is, people have to take on board that for themselves. And if they see that actually, do you know what, there's something useful in this, and they change it. And if one or two people change as a result of it, I'll feel that in itself will be the biggest praise of the book. So to know that some people have read this and go, do you know what, I think you're right. I think because I've been in some organizations where they're on their 5th iteration of trying to do Agile. And it fails every time. Why? Because the leaders don't get behind it. They don't understand what it's all about. They're using Agile mindset. The managers don't change. Leaders don't change. And the consultants that you're running it aren't using Agile methods themselves. So you know, it's very easy and simple, like I say, to spot the problems. But it's about coming up with a solution.
Okay. Okay. Let me move on to my questions, Mark. So
go on then.
So I'm going to put this questions in 3 different ways. Okay. First is for basically for beginners, and next is for intermediate people, and next is for like advanced guys like Scrum Masters and everything. So let me start with a beginner level question. Okay. Like anybody who is joining a Scrum team, you know, like when they are coming to an estimation point of view, they will be asked to estimate in terms of story points. Okay. So like if any new guy joins, like how he has to understand the story points first. If he has to estimate a particular user story or something like.
Okay, so the problem that we quite often have then when people come into teams for the first time is that they may or may not have capability. So let's assume that they have some capability,
Okay.
yeah, which makes them not a complete beginner, yeah. So they have some capability, and then they're asked to estimate stories. Now, the whole thing that I said earlier about it depends. So it depends on the method that you're following, because if you're strictly following SAFe, then I think the answer is 7 story points. Yeah, it's always the same, yeah, from what I can gather, at least anyway. So estimation is an interesting one. How do we get them to understand what story points is about? Well, we help them to understand it by giving them the training. And I'm not going to do the training here and now, but again, you'd have to understand as well, what is the purpose of the estimation, you see? So it's about going back to why. Why are we estimating? Because I know there's a big following out there for no estimation. We don't estimate. Yeah, but you see, that's kind of a hard thing to sell to senior managers. Who say, oh yeah, we don't estimate. Because again, this gets mistranslated as we can't tell you how accurately. But that's the problem, you see, isn't it? What we do is, if a new person comes into the team and they say, well, I don't know. Well, no, see, I don't know means you're backing off from the problem. And it means you're not engaging with the problem. So let's talk about this. So the big and the most important part of the estimating process is the discussion that lives behind that. So let's have a chat about this. So the new person in the team, the beginner, ought to be really listening to what's going on. So, and depending on how you do your estimating, and whether or not you do it on a big board like this, or you use your poker cards or whatever, if you're listening to the conversations about who gives the minimum example, who gives the maximum example, then you can start to learn so much, in those sessions. So you get an idea, and again, whilst it doesn't always work, and gut feel is useful in some contexts and not in others, I think in this context it's good to get a gut feel. So I get a gut feel that if I'm going to be writing this, and this is me estimating what I'm going to be doing, I'm not estimating what you're going to be doing, because that's not appropriate. But if I estimate what I'm going to do, I guess it will take about this amount of time. So to always give something. But equally, what's very useful here, and one of the things I used to do when I trained Agile teams, was do what I call my people and interactions course for people, which helped people to understand some of their cognitive biases. So when it comes to estimating, some people overestimate, some people underestimate. So if we have an awareness of where our tendency tends to go, then we can factor that in as well and say, well, I tend to overestimate quite a lot. So I've said this will be a 50 story points. It actually might be 25 or something. And I know they're not the right numbers. I can't remember what the Fibonacci sequence is right now, top of my head, but 50, 25 don't sound right, are they? So anyway, doesn't matter. Does that answer the question well enough for your beginner person?
Yeah. So the other, because I'm going to ask only 2 questions from each one. So the other
Okay.
one is that for a beginner, whenever they are joining, you can see a lot of certifications is rolling around. I mean, from different organization basically. Is that good for a beginner to take it, or else?
Okay. That's a really good question. And again, as you've noticed, you've got me on a hot point. Yes, because I sort of, yeah, I'm a bit like this when I see so many certifications. I think certification, but my encouragement is to look, when you're getting your certification, don't just get the certification, read behind the certification. What is the certification actually supposed to be giving you? You shouldn't just be getting it, just get a little badge. So you can say, look, here I'm a PSP S3SS1 or whatever, I don't know. There's so many out there. I mean, look, I have only one Agile qualification, and that's the Scrum Mastery thingy. See, I can't even remember what it is. Because my value that I bring to organizations is about experience rather than certifications. Whereas I know that people like to see certifications. But yet where I've got more certifications is in coaching, because I've graduated up to becoming a master level coach. And I think it's extremely important there, because there's more of a passion for me to understand that than there is about Agile stuff. So the short answer to your question is, I think it's important for people to get certifications at the beginner level, but not to rely on them too heavily. Go and start to read around. Actually work with people who've got the experience, and they'll tell you the contexts in which these things work and where they don't work. That's far more important, you see, rather than the certification.
Okay, I'll go to the next one, intermediate level. Okay,
Was
so
that the right answer though?
yeah, 100%. So again, in terms of estimation, I'm coming. Always estimation, it's very difficult to convince to the organization, because the more less we estimate, or the more we estimate, it has a direct or indirect impact on the organization. Like in your experience, like what is the best way to estimate a story? Like, do you have any guidelines on that?
Yeah,
I mean, there are different, yeah.
Quickly. Don't spend too much time on estimating. It's not worth it. It really isn't worth it. Because I've known teams to be sat there and me to come in as an Agile coach, and they sit there arguing over a story which is either 2 points or 3 points. One story point, over, maybe what, I don't know, 50 or 100 story points in a sprint. What are we talking about? Why have we pretty much wasted 20 minutes talking about one story point? We could have written the thing by now. So let's not do that. So the idea of the estimation, keep it as short as possible, but make it as meaningful as possible within the bounds of your sprint planning. So if your sprint planning is taking more than an hour or two, it's probably too long. And that's quite a proportion of your working time in the week gone. So for me, it's keep it short, keep it simple. And again, one of the things that I tend to use is this thing called the affinity method of story estimating. So rather than sitting there with the poker cards, which are useful, if you've got like 100 stories to estimate, if you're using poker cards, that's going to take you hours, maybe days to get through, to have all the conversations. That's a lot of time wasted. But if you use the affinity method, by putting one story point down that end of the board and 100 story points down here, and start to give people the option to go around and do it, and I'm sure you're familiar with that method, then that's my preferred method. And that's good enough, you see. That'll give us a good idea. And if we come back and visit that at the end of every sprint and say, were these story points within the right realms? Great, brilliant. That should help us, because the reason why we want story points, ultimately, for me, is to know what the velocity is to get an idea of how quick we're going, how quick we're delivering stuff. But it's not really about speed though, is it? Because you can deliver rubbish software very, very quickly. So in which case, that's not useful either, is it? So you want to be delivering quality software quickly, but quickly enough, not too quickly that it falls over because it doesn't become quality. So it's an interesting one. It's a very tricky set of questions to answer, especially without having the team in front of you and stuff. But from all the experience I've had doing this, that would be, I suppose, my best I guess on how to do estimating the best way.
Yeah. The reason why I'm asking estimation, there actually everybody fails as far as I see. Like wherever I worked, like once the estimation fails, automatically it has an impact in all the places, and there actually a lot of struggle is happening. Okay, again, an estimation question on intermediate level only, like because I've seen like this T-shirt sizing. I hope you will be aware, like as well as this poker type of estimation. Okay,
Yeah.
certain organization adopts T-shirt sizing because of relatively larger stories. And this poker estimation is, as we know, like we follow the Fibonacci series here. Like how do you cater this? Like which suits best for which organization, basically?
Well, again, that all depends, doesn't it? But to be honest, I loathe T-shirt sizing. I can't stand it. It doesn't really tell you anything, large, medium, or small. It really doesn't help. I think the estimating around points helps more. But again, remember, why are we doing it? Look, what we want, and again, this is an interesting one, because quite often we have to ask ourselves about predictability. What we're trying to do is demonstrate predictability. And in one of the DSDM principles, it's about demonstrating control, demonstrating that we're delivering what we say we're going to do within the time we said we were going to do it. Yeah, so the whole point of it is to actually make sure that we are doing enough, but not too much, and not biting off so much that we end up overwhelming ourselves. Because quite often, it's interesting, your words that you used earlier, it was this idea of failure when estimating fails. What do we mean by fail? How would you know your estimate has failed? And could you get a wrong number? Because if it's a wrong number, well, that's okay. You change it. We learn from it. So we go into our retrospection. We say, right, okay, we are completely wrong with that one. But look at all the ones that we were right about. And again, here comes another cognitive bias. People have a tendency to focus on the negativity. The project managers, that you never see them going, woo, we're all excited about all the positive stuff that's going on in the organization. No, they get very annoyed about all the rubbish stuff that's going on in the organization, because they think that's their job, to go and beat people up over the head again about, you haven't delivered on time, you gave the wrong. Yeah, look, that's all stupidity. You don't want to be getting involved with that. That's not really going to help you at all. What you want to do is actually get the team centered around doing things in the most effective fashion. And quite often, if we can skip the estimating, maybe it's not helpful. Maybe we'll just commit that we'll get this one story which provides all the value for this particular sprint, and we'll all work on it together. Maybe that would be better. But yet I don't see organizations or project managers signing up for that, because it's almost, what I see quite often is that people need to be given permission to go and do what they think is the right thing. And that's not the job of the manager. The manager isn't there to grant and sanction you to go and bless you that this is the right way to do things, go and do it. What does he know? Quite often he won't. He'll be so far removed from the issues that he's not going to help. That's not all project managers' mind. Some project managers are really good and switched on, but those ones that are would actually know that the team knows what's the best, unless they don't, and in which case some further coaching is needed of the team to get them to that position.
Okay. I'm going to put this question for seniors, basically. So this question will be a little straight because let's assume I'm getting onto a chaotic project, okay, where the estimation, they are lagging behind, and the team is totally out of control. Like an experienced Scrum Master comes in. So what would be his role over there? I know that's very straight, but let me have a thought from your end. Like what would be his line of action in this aspect?
Okay, so if I were that Scrum Master coming into the organization and I was told ahead of time that, look, actually, we're going to get you into this team that's not delivering, they're not providing value, there's all this and the other. My first thing that I would do when I go in there is I would do nothing. I wrote an article, some time ago, and it's, I entitled it, "Don't just do something, sit there." rather than the other way around. Don't just sit there, do something. The problem is that if the Scrum Master comes in and makes interventions too soon, you don't know then, if they're doing things that are impacting the team in a positive fashion. So my first job is to come in and just listen and look, smell, just hear what's going on, get a feel, speak to people, notice, go around. And I would do that for one sprint, just to see what's going on. Now, I guarantee you that I'll get some jip, from the people up there. What the bloody hell are you've had a sprint and they're still shit. Sorry, I swore again. So, and they're still not delivering what they're supposed to deliver. No, you see, look, you misunderstand. Because what we're really talking about here is human behavior and psychological mindsets. Now, if you bring in a Scrum Master that's designed to improve the team, what you're actually saying to the team is, you're broken. So that in itself is a bad message. So for me, I'll come in and I'll say, look, honestly, and if I'm the Scrum Master, my responsibility as a Scrum Master is the team and the beneficence of the team, the well-being of the team. That's my job. And I'd be honest, I'd say something like this. I'd say, look, seems like the boys outside there aren't too happy about how things are going. In fact, some words they used for me was, this is a bit of chaos. Now look, I don't know if it is or it isn't. I'll tell you what, why don't you show me your best work over the next sprint? I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to interfere. I just want to see what's going on, because I have some suspicions, and I know the suspicions won't always be in this room, because it could be changing requirements. How often have we seen that? Changing requirements. And the team gets blamed because they're not delivering for the changing requirements. Remember I spoke about the inland revenue there earlier? I was on a year-long program, and 11 months into the program, they said, oh, right, we're going to change the requirements. But it's okay, though. We'll still hit the deadline, won't we? Because that's in a month's time, because you're agile. What? Firstly, I don't know what the changes are. And 11 months in, you think you can just throw away 11 months of work and then you have 1 month left and still get all the requirements? How does that work? See, some people are never satisfied, and those people quite often are the middle managers who think, this is what I mean, my mistake number one, they think they know what agile is and they don't. And that's the problem. That causes problems to the team. And if the team are acting chaotically, quite often it's because there's chaos going on around them. It's quite often not the team's fault. But it's no one's fault, really, because this is systemic, isn't it? It's a system, all with its interoperating parts. And you have to pay attention to each of those operating parts. So if I'm the Scrum Master, I've only responsibility for one aspect of that system, and that's my team. I can't influence. I can try to influence what's going on outside the room. I can start to have conversations with the other teams that are interacting, because they're part of the system too. But yeah, it's an interesting one, to sit down and say, right, how do we make this team right? Because if we go in with that sort of attitude to start with, one that's a remedial attitude, then that isn't a good place to start any change. What you want to do is start with a change, say, let's get better. Don't say you're rubbish to start with, let's get better. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, got it. And my next question, and this will be my last question, Scrum Master, basically, we will say in terms of Scrum Master, it's like a servant leader, but typically when you get onto an organization, you more or like behave like any Scrum Master, the expectation from the organization, it will be, you have to act like a project manager actually. It changes actually very often. So my question here is let's assume you are having a team and you know what is their capacity and what is their velocity. And as a Scrum Master, their company is asking, okay, in this quarter, we have got this much revenue. And the next quarter, I want an increase in revenue with the same team. So what will be the line of action on it? Because the team is getting matured, right? Sprint on sprint. So 3 months means we will get almost almost 6 sprints. If it's a 2-week sprints, almost 6 sprints would have been completed. So next sprint, they are saying, okay, we have enough stories on the revenue has to increase. Like here, like because the actual mind of the people will be that okay, I've completed this much of story points in the first sprint. The same will be there in the sixth sprint also. Again, it will be there in the seventh sprint, the eighth sprint. But internally in the team, it is very difficult to make the changes in order to increase their story points, even though they are getting mature. So, what will be your line of action actually here?
Okay, so that I think maybe you're trying to give me a trick question, Bahruddin. Yeah, it's in some ways interesting because I get this quite a lot from managers. This is why I try not work with managers anymore, because they really annoy me. You know, especially when they say, well, they've been doing this now for many sprints. Surely their story point delivery should be going up like that. What? What? To infinity and beyond? You know, come on. You know, it doesn't work like that. What you need to understand, Mr. Manager, is there's this thing that I teach people, which is this thing called sustainable flow. You want to find out what is the flow of the team. How much can they do that delivers the highest possible quality in the in this 2 week sprint or week sprint, whatever it is, and hope that that stays constant over time. You'll then have some tram lines which say, if you go over this is sometimes we deliver more story points or sometimes we deliver less. When you go above or below the tram line, that's the time you want to start inquiring. How come this sprint we delivered this many when that's actually 20 or 30% more or less than what we normally deliver? So that's an inquiry. Go back to your point about revenue. Revenue is not the team's issue. It's not their issue at all. The team's issue is to deliver highest quality software according to the requirements that their product owner should be in conversations with around the wider team to understand how that revenue comes in. So revenue is not the team's problem. The team's issue quite often is a performance issue, which should be hopefully managed and controlled by the Scrum Master, who will be protecting the team to make sure that there's no rubbish coming in, like, make sure you get that delivered this week. And when you said there about project managers, and I did this, because I did some training some time ago in India for a very large company. And one of the things I recommended, and I explicitly recommended it, as part of the training, to the managers, say, look, now you've already got a bunch of project managers in your organization. I don't recommend that they become Scrum Masters unless they're really bad project managers. What? What do you mean a bad project manager? Now, you see, I'm being a bit provocative here because this is how I work with people. You see, I get them to pay attention. I'll say some stupid things sometimes just to see if they're listening. I mean, what do you mean a bad project manager? Look, a bad project manager, from your perspective, is one who cares too much about the team, not about the customer delivery. Yeah? A good project manager, from your perspective, beats the team up and delivers the customer value. He gets our revenue for us. That's a good project manager. If you've got that sort of attitude about how this all works, you're in the wrong business. Because for me, the project manager, and this is what we do in DSDM, we separate out the project manager from the team leader or Scrum Master, so that the project manager tends to be outward facing. They'll look at the stakeholders, the senior leaders, the people out there who may be crafting the product backlogs across the whole teams, and they'll interact with all of those. The Scrum Master is inward looking. They look at the team. They don't look at all that stuff out there because their prime concern is the beneficence and the well-being of the team. That's it. They don't care about this stuff. So if you keep those concerns separate, that makes for a better way of working. But if you make those two sets of concerns into one person, I don't find many people who can manage that conflict of interest very well. And it becomes a bit of an issue. So hence the project manager tends to go one way or the other. They tend to go towards the team or towards the customer. And one person there is going to lose. And in which case that's not a really good way to go.
Okay.
Does that answer your question well enough?
Yeah, Mark. Okay, Mark, that's it from my end, like, because I've got a lot of information from your end. So this will definitely help whomever is seeing this video, and I'm sure we'll meet once again in order to get a bit more clarity once in a while so that the viewers can get more of your experience, Mark.
Brilliant. Well, look, if there's any other questions come up in the meantime, please feel free to either email me them or whatever. In the end, if you want to chat again in the future, let's do it. I've enjoyed this. It's nice to be speaking to people all the way over in India. It's awesome. It keeps me interested and keeps me young.
Always you look very young, Mark, really. Okay, then thanks
Awesome.
a lot. Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks for your time, though.
No worries. Thank you, Bakruddin. You take care of yourself.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Stay safe.